there. We'll be discussing transforming your unstructured medical records into HIPAA-compliant and actionable data. My name is Ray Cameron. I'm a part of the XTIVIA team. If you are new to XTIVIA, we offer a variety of enterprise technology solutions and services, including business intelligence and data warehousing, portal development, data management, and application development. And you can find out more about all of those services at XTIVIA.com. Today's webinar is going to consist of approximately 20 minutes of presentation, followed by a panel discussion and a time for questions. And you're welcome to submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to get to all of them by the end of the webinar if we can. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make it available on our website within hopefully a few hours, but just in case, we'd like for a day or so to process the video and get it up there. The first place that we're going to announce the availability of the recorded webinar will be on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. I'll send links to those to you shortly, or you can go to our website and find those. So our presenter today is Bill Inmon. He's the co-founder, president, and chief technology officer at Forest Rim Technology. And since he's widely known as the father of data warehousing, he doesn't need much of an introduction, but we do want to point out that our association with Bill goes back some 20 years through Connect, the Knowledge Network, and XTIVIA. And not only do we stand behind Bill's pioneering work with unstructured data, but we have the ability to support it. And we're thrilled to be having him present to us today. Bill, thank you for bringing this presentation to us.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's a real pleasure to be here with our partners, XTIVIA, and I'm excited. I'm excited about unstructured data because for the first time in the history of our profession, the world is able to start to take the textual, unstructured data and bring it into an analytical database. And in doing so, that opens up opportunities like never before. Now, this message, this opportunity of being able to take unstructured data and start to process it analytically with the computer is especially good news for the world of healthcare and the world of medicine. And the reason for that is healthcare and medicine, like no other profession, has been dominated over the years by textual unstructured data. All the way from the doctor's office, where the doctor sits there and takes notes as you're going through a checkup, to nurses, to hospitals, that throughout the medical profession, we have the need for being able to handle unstructured information. So what I'm going to do today is a very short presentation about the ability to take text and start to use text in an analytical fashion, and then I'm going to show a quick example of how that actually can be done. So let's talk then about capturing healthcare EMR data. And let me get the attention of my computer. Oh, computer. Okay. When you go into a hospital or a clinic, an electronic medical record is created for you. And when that record is created, there are typically three parts to the record. Number one, there's standard identification information and record-keeping information. Number two, you typically look for a narrative from the doctors, nurses, and providers that are involved. And number three, a record typically has lab signs, measurements, forensics, and things like this. So this is the basic structure of what amounts to an unstructured document. The types of examples you might find for identification of person's name and age. When it comes to the narrative, you might find diagnostic, prescriptive information. And at the bottom of the record, you might typically find laboratory results that relate to the condition of the patient. One of the interesting things about the records that are created for a patient is that the records are very widely varied in terms of length. Some records are rather short and standard. Other records have a long narrative, and other records have a lot of lab work, medication information as well. You just never know when you look at one of the EMR records what's in there. Now, what we're going to look at today is taking the information found in the EMR record and bringing it into an analytical database, because once we bring it into an analytical database, then we can start to do analysis on it. The identification portion of the record is actually quite simple. We look for things like age and location. Where things get to be interesting is where we go down into the narrative. And in the narrative, we use different sets of techniques of looking at and analyzing information. And finally, when we get down to the laboratory and prescriptive portion of the record, we use yet a different set of techniques to go in and understand and look at the record, all of which leads to the creation of information in an analytical database. The whole idea then is to use technology. We call the technology textual ETL to be able to take highly unstructured EMR records and create an analytical database. And what do you do with the analytical database once created? Once you have a database that's been created, you're able to take that database and do standard analytical processing on it using query tools, SQL, and so forth. So that once you've created the analytical database, you can now start to do processing that you could never do before. Now, in order to do this, a certain amount of what we call mapping is required. What is mapping? Mapping is a description of the record to textual ETL. And then once you've done the mapping, you can run your documents through textual ETL and put your output in any technology that you want. You can create an Oracle database, a DB2, a Teradata, a SQL Server database, Extreme Data, and many other types of data. So, and then of course, once you've created your analytical database, then you can do all sorts of sophisticated analysis on the information in the database. Once the relational database has been used, things like MicroStrategy, Cognos, and SAS to be able to do your analytical processing. And the net result of doing all of this is the ability to do automated analysis of what's going on in your medical records as opposed to manual analysis. That's the real payoff. So with that, I now want to quickly show you an example, because what we've been talking about here is not a great theory. It's not something that we would like to do next year or 10 years from now. It's something that we can do right now. Now, let me take you very quickly down to Brazil. A while back, we had the opportunity to work with Brazilian patient records. And so let's take a look at, now the only thing that's a little bit perhaps disconcerting to you is the fact that these records are in Portuguese. On the other hand, the fact that we're showing these records, we're not violating any HIPAA constraints, because HIPAA doesn't apply to medical records in Brazil. So when we take a look at this record, we find up here at the top some identified information: the person's name, the person's date of birth, the person's age. Then we go right into the narrative information that exists in the record. And this is where, and I don't speak Portuguese, when we did in fact worked on these records, we had our consulting firm in Brazil help us do the translation. But there are a few words in here that let me just point out. Dosagens probably means dosages. Electrolitos means electrolytes. Sodio probably means sodium. Potassio, I suspect, means potassium, and so forth. So you can go through these records and intuitively, nutricial, that would mean nutrition. Here's something about gastric relating to the stomach, and so forth. So this then is the narrative information that we find in the medical record. The third part of the medical record, and this particular one, if we look down here, we find different laboratory results. And I am neither a doctor nor do I speak Portuguese, but down here are information that if you were a doctor and spoke Portuguese would be of interest to you. SpO2 is one measurement in the body of some bodily function, and that was measured at 93 to 97%. Glycemia, which I assume has to do with the digestive system, is at 95 to 108 milligrams in terms of percentage. PAM, I believe, from working with this data, PAM refers. I thought it was blood pressure, but I think I'm wrong. At any rate, we have down here a whole section of laboratory information. Now, I want you to imagine trying to use this information in an analytical fashion. If you took these records as they are right now and looked at them in an analytical fashion, it would be very difficult to do. You would have to have an enormous capacity in your brain to remember, say, 10,000 or 20,000 records looking through that information. The truth of the matter is, when you start to get lots and lots of medical records and you want to look at the records in an analytical fashion, you can only absorb so many records, maybe 10, maybe 20, but certainly when you get to 10,000 or 100,000 records, the human brain just simply does not have the capacity for memory for all of this kind of information. If we want to analyze this information, we've got to take a different approach. The approach that we've got to take is to pull this information out of the medical record and put it into a database. Because once we get it into a database, we can then do analytical processing, statistical analysis, and things like that. So that's what the records look like. Let's just look at another one. Here's another record, and true to form, each of these medical records is different. In this particular case, this particular incident, episode of care at a hospital or emergency room, there were 4 places where narrative was written. Here's one place, here's another place, and yet another place. So this means that the patient, whatever his problem was, came through and had numerous encounters with doctors, nurses, and providers. At any rate, this is what the EMR record looks like. Let's now take a look at what the database would result from running through textual ETL. Let's go down over here and look for a file that says Demo Healthcare, and let's go take a look at one of the databases that's been created. And here we have one of the databases that's been created. Over here, we see the identification of the patient's record, number 1. Number 2, we see data, values. In this case, Federico Peña Os. Let's extend this, Os Rosales. So that's what the text was we found here. We look over here and find the metadata. And over here in the metadata, we identify that the text that we found over here is name. Then we go over here to 165 centimeters and altura. I don't speak Portuguese, but I'm pretty sure that means height. And then we look over here, 99 to 100. That would be the laboratory measurement of SpO2. Over here we have GLIC, which is glycemic index. That would be 78. So you see then that we can use textual ETL to go into the medical record, pull out the information in the medical record and place it into a database. And these are real values. These are real pieces of information that have been run through textual ETL. Now, what is the value of this table here? The value of the table here, from a standpoint of business intelligence, is that we can now process data with a computer, that we can now start to write queries looking for people who are over 35 years old, people who have a blood condition of whatever, and using the value and the metadata for the value, we can write very sophisticated queries, and we can execute these queries in a matter of seconds. Furthermore, the computer normally isn't bothered as long as we, have a modicum of data. If we have 10,000 records, if we have 100,000 records. Okay, I was just wrapping up, and I was saying that in this presentation, we have seen that that unstructured data is a real problem with all environments, but especially the healthcare environment. One of the problems with unstructured data is that trying to do manual analytical processing is very difficult to do. You get enough records and it becomes impossible to do. However, with textual ETL, you can go through your medical records, your healthcare records, take those healthcare records, put them into a standard relational database. And once you've done that, then you can do analytical processing to your heart's content. And so, and we showed an example of that, so that I wanted to make note that what we're talking about is not a theory, is not something that might come next year. It's something that's here right now. So with that, I'm going to end my part of the presentation. And Ray, why don't you take it over, and I guess we can begin the panel discussion.
Great.
Go ahead, Ray.
Bill, thank you. And Mangesh, I just introduced Mangesh. She's the Senior Director of Business Intelligence at XTIVIA. I think appropriate for Mangesh to jump in here, and we've got a couple other people who may join in on the panel discussion. But Mangesh, go ahead.
Yeah, great. That was great, Bill. I really appreciate you taking the time. I've been a fan of yours, a little geek speak there, for a number of years, and really value all that you've done for all of us here. So thank you so much again.
Well, thank you.
One of the things I wanted to do, Bill, was, kind of to take a step back. We have seen that, kind of the sort of results that we can produce out of a textual ETL tool. But, if we were to take a step back and talk a little bit about the benefits and applications that such a tool can have, I've heard different percentages out in the publications. Some say as many as 80% of data, especially in healthcare, resides in unstructured format. What are some of your thoughts and comments around that?
Well, Mangesh, I think that's absolutely true. I will say this much: some industries have more unstructured data than others, and healthcare probably has more than 80%. But as a general rule of thumb, 80% is the mark that we use when talking with people. And
yeah.
I think it's amazing that people in business intelligence over the years have done their decision making essentially based on 20% of data in their corporation. That the truth is, the majority of the data in the corporation has not been used analytically, and it's with tools like textual ETL that we enable organizations to start to use that other 80% in their decision-making capabilities.
Right, and that's just amazing to me, because here is all the intelligence that's just lying to be used. And people are not recognizing that fact. I mean, the type of benefits, at least I can see, Bill, are, you can really analyze the clinical data, you can affect financial outcomes, you can, essentially address the treatment plans for an individual, which really doesn't happen. I mean, talk a little bit about, those type of benefits as well, if you will, sir.
Well, the types of decisions that you can make once you can do analytical processing, once you can do business intelligence, simply are something that has to be imagined because we've not been able to do it before. But the really nice thing is you can start to look at large populations of data. Today, when you look at unstructured data, you can look at, realistically, 2 or 3 records, or maybe even, if you're really smart, maybe 5 records. But in terms of remembering and keeping track of information in those 5 or so records, that's a real challenge mentally. What textual ETL opens up is the ability to look at thousands of records, to be able to look at whole populations of people, and in doing so, to the researcher and even the clinician, the ability to look at populations worth of data is something that they've not ever been able to do before, at least not effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, data have been growing exponentially. The variety has been growing as well. And the velocity, I remember this word because you had mentioned that in one of your white papers, and it stuck with me for a number of years, is, the velocity, the variety, and the volume. I mean, it's just amazing how much we are capable of doing, yet how little we can do, and we are doing. So, Kurt or Jack, do you have any insights from that perspective as well?
Mangesh, this is Kurt Brennan with Textual ETL. All of those are great questions, and speaking from experience in actually working with some healthcare associated companies all the way from pharmaceutical to the clinic, is that I think one of the greatest values is it addresses a problem that companies that are very technical face, and that is they have been able to extract a lot of information from their existing data, which is obviously structured. But after a while, you've been so used to working with that data that oftentimes your analyst and certainly the business user more or less runs out of questions to ask of the data. And so then you're starting to lose insight. But what I've found is that once a client has this capability, it actually opens up a whole new world of new ideas for them to be able to go in and extract, gain insight into that.
Right. So talk a little bit about, the type of engagement a customer might do, utilizing this tool, and there has to be some form and some processes behind it. So I would pose that question to both you and Bill, and I'm interested in figuring out how to make this a part of your process, how to make this tool a part of your daily lives. What are the benefits? So
Bill could come at it obviously from the technical side. I should have mentioned that I've grown up in the sales side of the business, so I'm typically involved very closely with the clients, and from a process standpoint, a technical process standpoint, I would say that that the requirements to start gaining advantages from analyzing, I like to use the term taking your your unstructured data and enabling it. In other words, making it available in a form that it can be studied and gain value. But the thing is that a lot of the technical pieces of this are what XTIVIA is currently been doing with them, identifying the sources and stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
But the real value then at the end, though, is the fact that they are able to again gain insight into areas that they never have discovered before. Plus, this is important though, is that, and I don't recall if you mentioned this, Bill, but you're able to take and combine now your textual data with your structured data.
Right.
And then that's very, very big.
Bill, your thoughts?
Well, there's actually quite a few applications. From a research standpoint, what textual ETL does is to free up the research analyst to do research. Let me explain what I mean by that. I have a good friend of mine who is a statistician, and he was saying when you go to school, you learn all about these wonderful statistical techniques for doing analysis. And then when you get out into the real world, you spend 95% of your time gathering and cleaning data so that you think that you are prepared professionally to do one job, but when you get out into the real world, they don't tell you in school that 95% of what you're going to be doing is gathering and finding data. So what textual ETL does is it frees the analyst up to do what he or she is trained to do. That without textual ETL, your analyst becomes, in fact, my friend says, you graduate from college and then you turn into a database administrator. And for most people that are skilled in statistical analytical techniques, no one ever told them that they were ever going to have to be a database administrator. That's really not what their interest is, but in order for them to do what they do for a living, that's the reality of their life. So one of the really nice things about textual ETL is it takes the process of gathering and filtering and organizing and editing data and turns that into something that is no longer a labor that is very onerous to the person that is doing the analytics.
Absolutely. And, we often see this type of scenario with our customers is, data are siloed, and people protect their data, more than they protect their lives sometimes. And,
yep.
At times, a tool like this can actually, at least we firmly believe that a tool like this can actually help break those barriers. To gain that visibility and to make it actionable, you have this data content on your screen, Bill. And it just amazes me that, once you have these data, there are so many different things we can do, apply statistical techniques, and share this information. So talk a little bit about, what your perspective is, on how, once you have gotten the data out of unstructured formats, how can it be used, specifically in a health information exchange type of a scenario, and the type of benefits that you foresee in the marketplace?
Well, let me tell you one application that we worked briefly on a number of years ago was an early warning application for biomedical terrorism. That this particular organization monitored input from a wide variety of sources, thinking that if the United States were attacked by terrorists, that doing it in a biomedical fashion was one way that they would do it. So the earlier that we as a nation can detect that something unusual is going on, the faster we can respond and save people's lives. Well, the problem is that the information coming into the many sources of information coming in were all in the form of text. So the problem is we need to be able to take that text, turn it into information that can be analyzed and understood, and do it quickly, and do it over a wide variety of geographical locations. Now, this was one interesting application that we've run across. The truth is that there are many, many other applications. For example, when it comes to epidemiology, textual ETL is probably the dream of somebody in epidemiology, because being able to look across tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of medical records and find quickly and accurately information from those records is at the very heart of the analysis that an epidemiologist would do. So those are just some of the many, many examples. I'll tell you another case in terms of reporting, for compliance reporting for the different agencies that a hospital or a healthcare organization has got to respond to. Being able to go in and find information from those organizations to suit their needs is yet another source. The potential application of being able to take text and turn text into a queryable, actionable database really doesn't have any limits. At least we certainly haven't found the limits yet.
Right, right, and that's just amazing to me, Bill. That we have just barely scratched the surface of what what these type of technologies can do. One of the questions from our attendees is, it kind of is getting under the hood of the tool itself. So, the question is, so typically, if I'm part of an organization that would like to utilize a tool like textual ETL, how do I go about starting to formulate my strategy, starting to formulate my project plan, if you will?
Well, that's where the combined forces of XTIVIA and Forest Rim technology come into play, because between the two organizations, we've done these kinds of projects on many occasions, and we're more than happy to show and discuss what's required. Let me state that setting up one of these projects there's a lot of aspects to it, because text is complex, so these projects tend to be complex. The best way for you to understand what is going on and how it applies to your organization is to do what we call a proof of concept. A proof of concept operates on a limited amount of data, but you get to see in a proof of concept exactly what's going on, exactly what your output looks like, and a proof of concept can be done rather quickly. So rather, in the time that we have here today, I do not have time to start to go through the mechanics of how all of this works. In fact, there's a 4-day class we have for professionals to understand that. But what I can tell you, if you're really interested, through XTIVIA, a proof of concept is something that I would certainly consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're proud of our association with you and Forest Rim, Bill, and we stand by ready to do our part in this whole process as well. One of the last questions, and I think we're how are we doing on time, Ray?
We're doing great, and on that topic of a proof of concept, I'm going to go ahead and put, if anybody would like to request one of those, there's a couple ways you can do that. I'll post that in the chat window. But we've got still 15 or 20 minutes left.
Okay.
If anyone has questions, additional questions that they'd like to pose, now would be a good time to do that. But Mangesh, why don't you hit on that one?
Okay, yeah, sure. One of the things I wanted to cover, Bill, was the type of sources that textual ETL as a tool can handle. OCR technology certainly can be a source, email, spreadsheets, text documents. Is that all covered under this textual ETL tool? And talk a little bit about your plans on what you have seen in the past and where you see the tool growing.
Okay, certainly. As far as sources of text, we have yet to encounter a source that we can't handle. Typically, sources are in a Microsoft format of doc, docx, txt, and PDF. We can certainly handle those. We can handle other extension types coming from the Microsoft environment. We can handle email. We can handle HTML. We can handle raw database, taking data directly from the database. And I'm sure that out there someday we're going to run across a source of text that we can't handle. However, we have yet to encounter it. Now, OCR is a special case. We can handle the output from OCR. And by the way, textual ETL is not an OCR tool. We take the output from OCR and process it. But one of the things that you encounter when you're dealing with OCR is the quality of conversion done by OCR. In some cases, when you're lucky, OCR works just fine and your document comes out in a fully recognizable and accurate fashion. On the other hand, on occasion, OCR produces very sketchy results that as much as 50% of the data is misunderstood by OCR. And one of the nice features we have in textual ETL is the ability to take output from OCR and pass it through an improvement process so that what we do is when your output from OCR is sketchy, we have some interesting fuzzy logic algorithms that come in and try to recognize and improve the quality of OCR. Now, let me state categorically, if what happens in OCR is that 100% of your data is garbled by OCR, as occasionally happened, we can't do anything with that. And in fact, if we were that good, we would be in Las Vegas making money in Las Vegas. That's not what we do. We have to have some degree of quality coming through OCR, but we are able to enhance the quality of data coming through OCR when it comes through in a garbled fashion. So out there, and I also would like to mention, not only can we handle all sorts of types of input, we also, as we've seen today, can handle multiple languages. Right now we handle English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Dutch, and Italian. And right. So language is something that doesn't give us a problem either.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think one of the last questions I had, Bill, that I wanted to ask was, metadata plays a big role in any BI initiative. And textual ETL tool can be used, to leverage, get information, get insights of the unstructured data, and really help build an organization a solid metadata repository layer, so to speak. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, your thoughts on that?
Let me. That's a very interesting question that that you asked, and so let me kind of give you a little bit of perspective from my background. When I first started to look at the issues and problems of unstructured data, I kept trying to use the techniques and approaches that I had been familiar with working in the structured environment. And for a long time, I felt like a fish on the bank, where I felt very uncomfortable because when I looked around, I didn't find the things that I was familiar with. Now, it is true that metadata is crucial to understanding and interpreting textual information. However, the metadata as it is applied to the world of unstructured data and text is quite different than the metadata that you've come to know and love when you're doing data modeling and the kinds of analysis that we do in the structured world. So it's kind of interesting. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine. We may write a book on the subject, but the truth of the matter is metadata is really important, not important, is essential to being able to make sense of unstructured data. However, metadata plays a very different role than it ever did in the world of structured systems. So right. You've hit the nail on the head. Yes, you have to treat metadata, but I have to tell you, when people come from the classical structured world to the unstructured world, for about a month or so, they feel very uncomfortable because the skills that they learned as a professional in structured systems, it's kind of like having to go back to the first grade and start over again, that there's a whole new set of rules. But once you get into it, it's really fascinating. Anyway, yes, metadata is at the heart of the matter.
Right. Right. Thank you so much. One of the questions from the attendees, Bill, is the fact that they use MySQL as their database repositories. And the question is, can textual ETL work with MySQL?
Yes, absolutely yes, it can.
Right. And for the most part, I would imagine that anything that has an ODBC connector, it should be fairly easy to implement, textual ETL in conjunction with that database. So
that is correct.
Any other, I would encourage, the attendees to present their questions.
Yeah, Mangesh, I was just thinking too, we've kind of promoted this to the healthcare community, but I'm confident that there's folks outside of the healthcare community that are in attendance today, and I'm wondering if any of them have a scenario or some unstructured data that they're wondering, is this a fit, or if there's a specific scenario that they have that they'd want to pose. I would guess that there's several that have specific scenarios that they're wondering how this would work for them or have questions about it. So we can take those kind of comments, ideas, or questions and bat those around if any of our attendees want to pose those.
Yeah. I mean that's a great question, Ray. One story that has stuck with me through the years is, and this is a little anecdotal. Van Halen, when they used to sign contracts, they used to have a clause in that contract that they wanted a bowl of only green M&Ms.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently 99% of the time people didn't read those contracts. And so that was the gotcha. So every time they would walk in a venue and they found a bowl of M&Ms with all the colors, they would know that people hadn't read. So talk a little bit about that, Bill. I mean, that's such a common occurrence in the world today that, all of this verbiage is in the in the contracts, and, textual ETL can help with that as well, right?
Absolutely. Corporate contracts is something that everybody has, and when you look at corporate contracts on a contract-by-contract basis, organizations manage their contracts well. But when you look at contracts on a collective basis, when you have 100,000 contracts and you ask someone in the organization how many of these contracts expire in 6 months' time, not only does nobody knows how to figure it out. Because today, to answer a question like that, you've got to manually churn through 100,000 contracts. And nobody does that. It just simply is not a practice. However, with something like textual ETL, you can answer a question like that as quickly as SQL will operate in your computer. That is, in a matter of seconds. So being able to create a corporate, collective perspective of contracts, looking at things like liability, looking at things like expiration dates, looking at things like the need to combine contracts, etc., and so forth, all of that is opened up by textual ETL with capabilities that we couldn't do it yesterday, but we can do it today.
Right. That's just great. That's, I think, with a tool like textual ETL, it just opens up so many different possibilities. And talk a little bit, as a final thought, Bill, talk a little bit about, the technology under the hood, so to speak. What sort of algorithms have been implemented for textual ETL, and we'd love to hear a final thought from you.
Sure. Okay, when people first take a look at textual ETL, one of the questions they ask is, okay, what's the secret algorithm under the covers? And the answer is there is no secret algorithm under the covers. And let me explain that. Text comes in different forms. Some text is the text that we all learn from however we learn English, to use proper punctuation, proper spelling, verbs and nouns and all that kind of stuff. Our English teacher would give us an A if we use proper text. But the problem is, and this is especially true in healthcare, in many forms of documents, text is not as the English teacher would like. For example, doctor's notes. You take a look at doctor's notes, and what kind of grade would the English teacher give the doctor? And the answer is most doctors I know would receive a failing grade. Why? They don't punctuate. They don't use proper sentence structure. They use acronyms. They don't spell properly. And so the English teacher would be going crazy, but the doctor would say, wait a minute, I'm a busy person, and I have to take these notes as best I can take them very rapidly. And so it turns out that text comes in many different forms. And what we found when we were building the textual ETL is that for the many different forms of text, a different algorithm is necessary. So when you look at textual ETL, what you find is you don't find one algorithm. You find about 35 different algorithms, and it depends upon the text that you're operating on as to which algorithms you choose to use. When people ask me about the algorithms of textual ETL, I tell them it is a mosaic, that it is something that is able to fit all different kinds of input of text, not just properly structured text. So,
right.
So I hope that answers your question.
It does indeed. It does indeed, Bill. And as a final thought, I mean, where do you see, this whole process, this whole technology taking us 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Obviously, sky is the limit, but people have to have some sort of. Sorry, go ahead.
From a business value standpoint, it has been my privilege in life to work as a pioneer in two areas. One was data warehouse, and the second is unlocking unstructured data. When I first started to think about data warehouse, I realized what a powerful concept it was, and I thought, wow, this is going to apply to everybody. But I'm going to tell you, once I started to see what unstructured data could do from a business standpoint, once you unlock it, I'm here to say that I think that unstructured data and unlocking textual data to where we can do analytical processing is going to be at least an order of magnitude larger than data warehouse. And I'm the father of data warehouse, and I'm proud to be considered as such, but I think that unlocking unstructured data from a business standpoint has at least an order of magnitude more impact on the world.
Right. That's absolutely true, sir, and thank you so much for your time today. Ray, any other final questions before you close the webinar? I don't see any questions being submitted, so I think we're ready. Are you?
Yeah, Mangesh, I sorry about that. I was wrestling with my mute button. Yeah, no, I don't see any further further questions. And so to wrap up here, first of all, Bill, thank you and your team for not only presenting today, but we've had some great conversations over the last month in preparation for today. And in addition to just being really grateful for your time today, the partnership that we have is one that we're thrilled about. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
For our attendees, again, if you're new to XTIVIA, I've got our homepage up here. You should be able to see that on my screen. And just a couple of things I want to point out under resources. If you click on webinars, you later today, tomorrow at the latest, we will have a recording of this webinar available. And on the webinar page, you'll see the upcoming webinar for next week, Big Data Without Big Security Challenges, a webinar that we're going to be talking about IBM InfoSphere Guardium. But the next item here will be today's webinar, and as you can see here, the recording is being processed. We'll have access to that up here. And again, just a reminder that if you would like to request a proof of concept, you can call us. If you catch us before the meeting ends today, you can send us a note through the chat, or you can go to the Contact Us page. You've got our phone number, email address, and a form here. And we'd be glad to follow up with you and visit with you about a proof of concept around today's topic or any of the other services that we offer. So thank you all for attending today, and we'll see you at our next webinar.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.